Hi folks, not holding up the video for too long, just to let you know that I've got a little announcement at the end of it. So if you want to hear that, listen all the way through or skip straight to it. Please don't do that. Anyway, on with the video. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me. Now, I'll apologise for my throat in advance. My voice may occasionally break because I'm still trying to get over this illness. As promised in part 1, this video is going to be me talking about some ideas I have on technologies and approaches the ancient Egyptians may have utilised during the construction of the Great Pyramid. However, these ideas are as low tech as I could possibly go, so if you're expecting to see the Egyptians using lasers and flying machines, not in this video. I do have ideas for more advanced tech that the ancient Egyptians may have utilised, which I'm going to put at the very end of this video. So, are we ready?
Hey, ho, let's go. Hey, ho, let's go.
I believe it takes too long with primitive tools to quarry individual blocks, so I would ask nature to provide a helping hand. First, I'd have teams of construction workers moving across a plateau to gouge out small channels across the surface. Then over these channels, soil would be put down, the aim to grow greenery, probably in the form of mosses and small plants, in a grid-like pattern, which would be continuously fed by water running through these grooves. Above the lines of soil, reed curtains would be hung, which are also regularly drenched in water. The reason behind this process is to reduce temperature along the grooves over the Egyptian winter, probably to just below freezing, for several weeks, perhaps even months. Limestone has imperfections, in the form of cracks and pockets of air and water. The water running through the grooves, guided by the plant roots, would find these imperfections and fill them. Then, over the colder period of the year, the surface plants and the wet reed curtains, the latter, a known ancient Egyptian cooling method, would cause water to freeze. The freezing would expand these cracks, helping to break up the bedrock, ready for the stone harvest. This would not be a quick process, probably taking at least 2 to 3 winters to make a real difference in the rock, but that then gives you years to build the canal, docks, barracks, and hire and train all the support crews. After all these smaller construction projects are completed, you can then use those very same builders to take part in the rock harvest, who would then be using the expanded breaks in the rock to aid in their work. Such a natural system may explain why the blocks of the pyramid come in all shapes and sizes. We humans like patterns. If we're going to cut a load of blocks out of a surface, we tend to like them to be all roughly the same size and shape. Nature doesn't care. Nature will simply find and exploit areas of weakness. This has been traditionally put down to the brute strength of the builders. Some seem to think that they may have been aided by wetting the sand, allowing the blocks to move easier over the surface. And of course others think I've developed a theory of my own, although granted it's not based on any evidence whatsoever. This is simply how I would do it. In my plan, shallow grooves are cut into the surface rock, with a pavement on either side. Into the grooves would go a kind of track, made up of 2 lengths of wood. The bottom length is what rests inside the grooves, although not in a continuous line like a railway. The second length of wood is slotted over the top of the first, which unlike the bottom piece is soaked in animal fat. Then, rocky debris fills the rest of the trackway, before water is directed to flow down it. This gives off a similar look to a railway, though one with gaps. In the meantime, the blocks are loaded onto sturdy wooden frames, with a bed of tied reeds, which serve to protect both the frame and the block from damage. As the frame and its heavy cargo are pushed along the track, The shape of the frame allows teams to push from both sides, as well as pulling from the front, possibly with the aid of camels, which by this point had already been domesticated for about 1,000 years. The base of the frame would be lubricated by animal fat, just like the upper part of the track. The fat aids lubrication, while the small contact area between the track and frame reduces friction between the two. However, it is the rest of the system that would allow it to work so well. The water soaks into the bottom length of wood, causing expansion, which is contained by the fitting of the upper length of wood and the surrounding stones. As the frame passes over each section, the bottom length acts like a hydraulic system, with the water being the hydraulic fluid, squeezing the water out of the bottom length of wood like a sponge. This has the effect of transferring the energy exerted by the weight of the block and frame into the surrounding rubble, much like what happens with a modern railway line. This reduces the stresses on the track, but because the sections are independent of each other, should one fail, it can be replaced within seconds. Every time a frame passes over a section of track, that section is then quickly inspected and given a fresh coating of fat. According to the official narrative, this was all done by a fleet of boats, which were constructed and crewed for this specific purpose, from the mines, via the Nile, and up the channels that lead to the Giza Plateau, loading and unloading their high tonnage cargo at specifically built docks, which also required specially trained workers. However, I don't believe this would work, certainly not with the vessels that are often depicted. These vessels are too shallow, with a relatively streamlined frame. Such vessels, if loaded with a heavy limestone block on its deck, would have a very high centre of gravity, making it dangerously unstable. This instability would likely have caused disaster, particularly as the vessel attempted to make the hard left turn from the flowing waters of the Nile and into the channel leading to Giza. It would also be extremely difficult to load and unload such a heavy cargo from such a boat, without heavy-duty lifting equipment. Now, we could overcome some of the risks by having a triple-hulled vessel, in effect 3 boats attached side by side by a large deck. However, such a vessel would be difficult and costly to build, difficult to manoeuvre, and still be difficult to load and unload. Now, I'm relatively convinced that boats were not used for this task, certainly not the types of boats the academics point to. Such boats, used to carry such a heavy load, would leave them vulnerable to regular damage, which requires trained experts to repair or build replacements. Personally, I'd use rafts, and in my plan, the rafts would be almost identical to the sleds that are being used on the Giza Plateau to transport the blocks from the mine there to the pyramid. The way I would do it is to have the same track system at the mines as I have at Giza. This is to slide the raft into the Nile. I would then tie rafts up to each other, perhaps as many as 12 loaded rafts together in 4 rows of 3. Each grouping would then have a guide boat. This boat wouldn't need to pull the rafts, simply keep them on a course down the middle of the Nile, while the natural current pushes the flotilla to Giza. On reaching the Giza Channel, a local harbour master crew would take possession of the rafts, handing over empty ones to the riverboat to be towed back to the mines. Meanwhile, the loaded rafts are pulled one by one up the slipway, joining the same track system as the land-bound sledges, probably along the same route as the modern causeways. With this system, we don't need a huge fleet of boats which require trained professionals to build and repair. Instead, we would have rafts, which almost anyone could build, even a relatively complex one, and as well as being easier to build, they're both easier to repair and more resilient to damage. This system also eliminates the need for well-trained dock crews with complex lifting equipment. Now, all you need is men, and perhaps animals, who can pull and push. The system also saves on time, as it removes the complex loading and unloading process, which is also more likely to fail spectacularly. If a rope or pushing arm fails on the raft, it simply slides back into the water, ready for another attempt. If your crane or lever system breaks, not only have you lost that equipment, you've probably sank the boat and put a giant stone right in your harbour area. Now, this has been the most difficult section for me. How the hell did they get those blocks up the side of what is basically a man-made mountain? There are of course many theories. I think personally the external ramps are just completely out. They'd have been so huge that you may as well actually leave them in place because they'd have been as impressive as the pyramids. Just keep them there. No, I think it's down to 3 possibilities. An internal ramp system of some kind, the external ramp, or as you quite often see depicted in movies and even documentaries, an external crane system. That latter one, personally, I think is also out, simply because if you're slowly moving a block up each section of the pyramid, hook it up to one crane system, take it up, unhook it, give it to the next crane system. For me, that takes far too much time. Again, we have got to try and work within this 4-minute margin we apparently have. My personal theory I call the hollow pyramid. Basically, it involves leaving the eastern side of the pyramid for later construction and instead finishing the other 3 sides. Then up this middle, I suppose you call it well or chimney, you would have a ramp system which would give it the look of an emergency fire exit. Of course with the track system I have down on the ground. This would then allow for direct access when building the internal structures like the King's and Queen's chambers, before encasing them in the eastern walls. However, if I was to be honest with myself, I still see a lot of issues with this plan. My plan, I mean. This forces me to conclude that the spiral ramp theory is the most likely, even if for some reason my gut and brain are screaming at me that this is wrong. No, honestly, I can't actually think of a single reason why the spiral ramp wouldn't be correct. It's just a voice in here. So, the obvious question. Would the ancient Egyptians have been able to build the pyramid as quickly as they did, using the technology they had? I think it's possible, but I still think it'd be so difficult it makes it very, very unlikely. I still believe it is far too much work to be done in such a quick period of time by such a small population, using the resources and the tools that is given to them. I still personally think it's a case of that either there was a structure there already and the Egyptians simply pretty much encased it in their pyramid form, or they had further tools which we do not credit them with. Now at the start of this video I referred to certain lost technology which the Egyptians may have had but then lost. However, there is obviously no evidence of the use of this technology, which is why rather than placing it in the earlier segment where I considered it as an actual part of the construction process, I'm instead putting it down as 3 questions. Question 1. Is there a chance the Romans actually had a resource of iron and knew how to use it? After all, one of the major problems that many of us have with the Egyptians building the pyramids is the fact that they were using tools that just do not stand up to the work that they were used for. Iron, on the other hand, would have made it so much simpler. Question 2. Could the Egyptians have utilised the power of the wind and the flowing of the River Nile? Basically, I'm asking if they could have had water windmills. I'm not just thinking of the agricultural processes they could have been involved in. Wind and water powered engines could have been used for a variety of tasks. Perhaps for sawing equipment, drilling, hammering, the powering of a conveyor belt, many things which would have greatly aided the construction of the pyramids. And finally, question 3. In an older video, I did propose that Giza may have originally been a mine for the extraction of shale, due to the fact that this material has multiple uses and would also have provided the Egyptians with oil to burn. Now, I'm not suggesting that this could have been used for anything like internal combustion engines. However, they could have used the oil for everything from cooking to manufacturing. Now, many would say that there is no evidence for any of this. However, we've got to consider the sheer amount of time that is involved here. Britain is a perfect example of how a technology can basically disappear over a period of time. When the Romans came here, they brought with them certain comforts such as central heating and heated baths. When they left, the remaining population continued to use these premises. However, without the Romans, they had no ability to effect repairs when anything broke down. And of course, slowly over time, things broke down and they were never repaired, and so they were left to ruin or were taken apart to be used in other projects. Is it possible that 4,000 years ago, roughly, that Egypt went through the same sort of turmoil? So, what do you all think of the 3 ideas I had to speed up the work rate and the 3 questions I have in regards to technologies the ancient Egyptians used to have? Excuse me, there goes my voice again. Whatever they are, please feel free to leave a comment below or come and talk to me on Twitter, as I'm quite often there. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. It does mean a great deal. But that's it for this video. Thank you very much and take care of yourselves, folks. Hello everyone. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. I really do appreciate it. Although you may not appreciate this, for the foreseeable future, I'm actually walking away from this YouTube channel. I'll keep it up for people to see the videos that I've already done. However, it's highly unlikely I'll be doing any new videos, certainly anytime soon. Unfortunately, my circumstances just don't support me doing this any longer. I've not got the time, and it's got to the point where the time I do have is such a rush, I simply don't enjoy it anymore. Besides, I don't think I'm particularly good at it either. So, I'm not walking away from the subject of ancient history. You'll still be able to find me on Twitter, and I may someday come back to doing YouTube. Although I must admit I'd be more inclined to do something as part of a group rather than doing actual videos. As I said, I simply don't enjoy it anymore, so I am considering setting up a new website. I used to have one and it did rather well, so that's where I may put my efforts. But I am about to embark on a completely new project, very different from anything I've been doing, so that will take up most of my time, so we'll just have to see what happens. However, those of you who have been watching these videos, thank you very much, and I hope you don't find this disappointing. You shouldn't. There's absolutely loads of brilliant YouTube creators out there doing the same sort of thing, but at a better standard, so watch them. If I see you on Twitter, I shall see you there, and if not, thanks for hanging around.